They trained for 2 years, are the lord of the skies, now take Quest CL, flight level 36, and our lives are in their hands. Pilots, but what happens if a pilot doesn't know what he's doing at turned? Like this, and no up into the ground, the airplane hits the surface of the sea. Everybody Dies pilot era has been responsible for some of the worst accidents in aircraft. History, unfortunately, he didn't handle this particular situation correctly to reduce pilot. Error has become one of the big challenges of aviation. Tens of millions of pounds are being thrown at the problem. Airbus's philosophy was we can make an airplane that's pilot-proof. But in a bid to eliminate pilot errors, have we gone too far? Could be some of these developments may have actually caused. Qantas is the safest airline in the world. Famously, none of its big jets has ever crashed, but in autumn 2008, that reputation is suddenly on the line. Qantas Flight 72 is traveling from Singapore to Music, Perth. It's an Airbus A330, one of the most modern aircraft in the world, at the controls the flight crew are equipped with the latest technology designed to make flying safer. But as the aircraft packed with over 300 holiday makers nears the Australian coast, it suddenly performs a series of bizarre and dangerous maneuvers. First, it climbs 200 feet. Then, equally suddenly, it drops 650. What's the plane doing? What's the plane doing in the cabin? There's music, chaos up in the cockpit. The pilots have no idea what's going on. The plane is acting entirely on its own. Then it happens again. Uncommanded by the pilots, the plane plunges another 400. FT minutes later, the horrified captain issues a Mayday distress call. Mayday. Mayday, Mayday 1 to 72, 315 people's lives are on the line. Will the pilot be able to rescue the situation? Yet the irony is the entire incident is due to a computer-controlled flying system designed to eliminate a common cause of air crashes. Pilot error. Just how serious the problem of pilot error can be is brought home to the people of Britain in the winter of 1989. British Midland Flight 92 takes off on a routine flight to Belfast in Northern Ireland. Music. On board are 118 passengers and 8 crew. The aircraft is one of Boeing's new 400 Series 737s. In charge is 43-year-old Captain Kevin Hunt, one of British Midland's most experienced. Music. Pilot as first officer is 39-year-old David M.L. The plane rapidly climbs to 28,000 FT. It's a normal takeoff, but then 13 minutes into the flight, just as the aircraft is about to hit cruising altitude, there's a shock. The bang sends a wave of alarm through the cabin. Passengers frantically look around. For in Music, explanation. Hunt and Len immediately suspect when the plane's 2 engines has blown up. The cockpit voice recorder picks up Hunt urgently asking which of the 2 engines is damaged, which one. His first reaction is to turn to the aircraft's instruments, but the instruments that would tell him if an engine is malfunctioning, the so-called vibration instrumentation, is notoriously unreliable in 737s. At the time, pilots don't trust them, so when smoke appears in the cockpit, McClellan falls back on his general knowledge of the aircraft. This tells him the smoke must be coming through the air conditioning system, and this in 737s is powered by the right engine. The cockpit voice recorder now picks up Macklin making a clear decision. It's the right one. It's definitely the right one. Shutting down the right. Hunt immediately shuts down the right-hand engine. The clunking and vibrations sees calm, returns to the cabin. The passengers relax. But minutes later, there's another even bigger bang. Once again, the plane is rocked by vibrations and everything goes eerily quiet. The second left, an engine has died. Flight BM-92 has no power at all. Seconds later, the 400-ton aircraft smashes into the ground. An airliner with 118 passengers on board has crashed on the M1 motorway in Leicestershire. In Belfast, the flight's destination, anxious relatives wait at the airport for a plane that will never arrive. Initial signs suggest there won't be many survivors. Ed Trimble led the air crash investigation. Mr. Trimble, BBC. Can we talk to you? I'm sorry. I think most investigation would have said the chances of many surviving that would have been low. Clearly, the aircraft is flying at over 100 knots on the approach, and suddenly it's been brought to halt very abruptly indeed, and therefore one would have anticipated the G-forces would have been really significant. Amazingly, only 47 passengers. Die 71. Survive. We were dying to grind with a crash. All the lights were out, and we seemed to be at an angle of about 45 at the vertical, and at that time, really, there were a few people moaning in the cabin, saying, "Oh, my legs hurt of somebody. Please help me. I think I've broken my leg." The teal piece that I was on actually appeared to break away and top over, and at that stage, I was left to suspended upside-down survivors are taken to hospitals across the region. Among them is the aircraft's Captain Kevin. Hunt at first, he's hailed as a hero for at least bringing some people down alive considering the trouble. He was obviously, and I reckon he must have nursed that plane to get so close. He must have done a brilliant job. But soon afterwards, questions started to be asked. We were getting reports of a GR, ground witnesses who had seen and had this aircraft on the approach. What we were being told was that the left engine was covered in fire. It was like looking into a furnace, someone said. So clearly the left engine was in trouble during that approach. This fire in the left-hand engine would have been the first bang the passengers heard, but that shouldn't have been fatal. The twin-engine plane can fly quite safely on one engine. Clearly that hadn't happened. So the question was, what's happened to the right engine? The right engine is minutely inspected, expected slowly. An awful truth dawns. The F-strip inspection of the right engine revealed that there were no problems with the right engine prior to the impact. It's the right when it's definitely the right one shutting down the right. And yet this right-hand engine is the one the crew had shut down. So why had the pilot turned off his only working engine? The investigation will now reveal a classic case of pilot error. The pilots simply weren't familiar with their aircraft, Hunt and Clell, and not trusting their instruments and relied on their general knowledge of 737s. This told them the smoke must be coming from the right engine, and so they'd shut it down. What they didn't know was that the new 400 series 737 is different from its predecessors. The air on is powered by both engines. The smoke and smell came from the damaged left engine, not the perfectly good right one. More pointedly, the vibration instruments on the 737 400 series that indicate whether an engine is malfunctioning are more reliable than on earlier models. These had relayed with absolute accuracy that it was the left engine that had gone wrong, but the pilots had ignored the evidence in front of their eyes. David Ellermount is a pilot and aircraft journalist. Both pilots had the vibration information in front of their eyes, and it was accurate. It was showing them where the problem was, but because they were used to flying on the 73-300, where the vibration instruments were not reliable, they disregarded the instruments all together. The investigation has revealed an alarming truth. Neither pilot knew enough about the aircraft they were flying. The crash was caused by pilot music error. Hunt, far from being a hero, is sacked, but behind the crash lies a much bigger issue that is increasing the chances of pilot error. A deluge of new aircraft models starts appearing from the 1980s onwards. It was a period of great development, a great change in industry. Captain Chris Clark is an airline pilot, and flight trainer pilots were faced with a significant number of differing equipment, even on the same type of aircraft. It's a situation almost designed to foster pilot error. There are 20 versions of the Boeing 747 and about the same number of the Airbus A300 series. There are 9 variations of the Boeing 737 and several versions of the Airbus A320. Pilots are having increasing difficulty keeping up with the ever-changing music models. It could be a different set of flight instruments, or it could be a different flight management system. Computer, each new version is better and safer than its predecessor or feels a particular niche in the competitive aircraft market. Are you doing Emergency Watch all episodes of Ice Pilot Watch on mobile devices, or the big screen all for free, no subscription, fire download B now? But Kegworth has dramatically shown the downside. Hunt and Macklin had almost no training on the new Boeing 737-400 series. The airline had assumed that because these people were experienced on the 737-300, that they really only needed what they referred to as a differences course to go on to the 400. Kegworth is a clear warning: pilots need more systematic retraining if there are not to be further cases of pilot error. Both regulatory authorities and airlines recognize that where there was a difference in the flight deck equipment, even if it be on the same model but was just a variation of that model, there was a clear need for some training to reduce pilot error. Pilots now begin to spend more time in highly realistic computer control flight simulators. These can recreate almost any flight scenario almost anywhere in the world. Pilots can quickly and efficiently learn about different aircraft, but despite the new training opportunities a tower from Midland One, we've had an undercarriage collapse the airline industry doesn't fully learn the lessons from. Kegworth, it's not just about having more training. The training has to be good, or there can be unexpected consequences. Every bit is deadly. It will need another tragic accident for the industry to realize it must do even more. Autumn 2001, and an American Airlines flight takes off from New York's Kennedy Airport. Flight 587 is bound for the Dominican Republic. On board, many of the passengers are visiting family and friends, but almost immediately after takeoff, something goes wrong. Patrick Tuig is a local Catholic priest. I spotted this aircraft going over. I thought too, looking back on it, that it was flying a bit low. It turned like this and nose dived into ground. So then I said to myself, oh my God, this is very, very serious. And I remember thinking how beautiful that plane looked in the last second of its life, because the sun shining directly onto that aircraft before it hit the applause ground. American 587 Heavy, I'm not receiving your transponder. American 587 Heavy New York. American 587 Heavy New York. 26 people die immediately, including 5 on the ground. Christine Negrin is a journalist who's written extensively about the aircraft industry. It was a dramatic event because it was only 2 months after September 11th. And so there were immediate concerns and eyewitness accounts and everything else that the plane had been the victim of a terrorist attack. Why should a plane suddenly fall out of the sky and explode on the ground? So the general talk among people looking on was, gee, this must have been another bomb on that aircraft. Is one of the worst accidents in American aviation history. It was impossible to get really near to the fire. It was so intense. If you saw the people in the immediate vicinity, they were. Stone, one of the victims, is Jose Laura, a law student. His sister still finds it hard to talk about it. It's really hard to live with this pain. Every time when I see my brother picture, I don't even want to see my brother picture, because I don't want to think that he's not here. Who else know more? And it's really hard. The man in charge of the crash investigation is Bob Benz, and he immediately faces demands for instant answers. This is a very public disaster. In a very public place, there was a lot of pressure from the city of New York. Of the very first news conference we always get the question of what happened here. What's the cause of this accident? And of course, we can never answer. The hunt for answers is hampered by the sheer scale of the devastation. There is almost nothing left of the aircraft. My initial thoughts are really about the magnitude of our job. A lot of times in these types of accidents, we get a lot of information out of the wreckage itself. But in this case, unfortunately, the fire was so complete. The aircraft was full of fuel when it hit the ground that we had very few physical clues to look at. But then they find one massive clue. It had to do with the vertical stabilizer of the airplane, that it was floating in the bay over a mile away from the main impact point. It would be very strange if a terrorist simply blew the tail off of an airplane. And so we thought early on that we're probably up against something a little more complicated than a terrorist attack. It is the case that the National Transportation Safety Board is the lead agency, because all information we have currently is that this is an accident. But if it is an accident, what caused it? Initially, suspicion falls on Airbus's revolutionary construction methods. Large parts of the aircraft are made from a new material known as carbon fiber. Composite materials are a bit of the wave of the future, strong, and as importantly, they're lightweight. And in the airplane business, so weight equals money. One of these carbon fiber components is the aircraft's tail and its attachment points. Had there been a massive failure in this revolutionary new construction. Material the implications, our horrific alarm bells were set off. We worried a lot about the rest of the Airbus fleet, a weather or not a there, were inherent weaknesses in and other Airbuses. If Airbus are building aircraft with flawed components, could hundreds more drop out of the sky? So we spent a lot of time studying and testing the strength of these components and how good the design was. They use an ultrasound scanner to test the material for hidden hairline cracks or weaknesses unlike metal that the fractures and stresses can't be seen by the naked eye. They re-examine the design. They examine other air buses. They can find nothing that explains why the tail should shear off. Turned out to be pretty much a red herring. This dyne was stronger than it was certified to be, but if it isn't a structural fault, why has the plane's tail fallen off? In a hunt for other clues, Bond's team recreate the aircraft's last minutes. Their attention soon focuses on the aircraft's first officer, 34-year-old Sten Mullen, the son of an airline pilot. Mullen has been flying for 10 years, all of it with American Airlines 587 Heavy, can ground runway 31 for departure. Taxi left on Bravo hold. Short of Juliet that day as flight AA 587 prepares to take off. Mullen is at the controls. 587 Heavy just in front of him is a Japanese Airlines flight. As the Japanese flight climbs, its engines generate powerful vortexes of wind. They are known as wake vortexes. Wake vortexes are very powerful miniature tornadoes that are created as an aircraft flies through the sky. One comes off each wing tip. These vortexes can cause serious air turbulence. If, for instance, a very small aircraft were following very closely behind a very large aircraft, the smaller aircraft can experience structural damage. The effect of flying into wake turbulence would be the effect of falling into a food mixer. So the planes following need to keep their distance. Air traffic controllers know this. Every pilot is expected to know it because that a lot of upset in the Error 57 Heavy. 3. Music left, but could such a common phenomenon as wake turbulence really have upset? Flight 587-587. Heave at the National Transportation Safety Board. Benz's team continue the search for answers. They examine the aircraft's battered flight data recorder for evidence. They turn the numeric data into an illustration of what happened. Gradually, they piece together Flight 587 final minutes, and it's all about pilot error. The cockpit voice recorder picks up the captain's voice. A little awake Yulens, yeah. Mullen replies, music, yeah. Then to stabilize the plane, he'd stamped on the rudder. Controls, it's a standard procedure for stabilizing an aircraft in these circumstances. A flight data recorder shows Mullen had been particularly energetic. First, he forced the rudders sharply to the right, then to the left. He operated them so aggressively that the rudder went to stop. In other words, as far right and as far left as it could go 4 times in 7.5 seconds. So back and forth, bang, bang. Bang, bang, bang. The rapid movement creates huge stresses on the aircraft structure. Eventually, they become just too great. The first officer put loads on the vertical stabilizer that were twice the design loads that the thing was certified to take, and it ultimately failed. The attaching points fracture. The tail shears off and the plane smashes to earth. But how can a pilot break an aircraft? By simply manipulating the rudder controls. It now emerges that Airbus has issued specific warnings against violently reversing the rudder, but American Airlines has never warned its pilots that this could lead to structural failure. Indeed, their training encourages pilots to use the rudder end energetically because of limitations and simulators and the teaching methods they were using. They were probably instilling in their pilots an unwanted desire to use the rudders aggressively, when perhaps music shouldn't. The conclusion is horribly clear. Over 250 people have died because of pilot error. Music. Mullen had simply not been properly trained to fly in music. Airbus. In the course of the investigation, other facts also emerge about Mullen. We found that he had a propensity for overreaction. He tended to overreact to situations such as wake turbulence, and unfortunately, he didn't handle this particular situation correctly. But for many lay observers, there is another question: why, at a very busy airport like JFK, where wake turbulence is a routine problem, was a junior officer with a reputation for overreacting, in charge of the takeoff is a story that goes back ironically to an earlier attempt to reduce pilot error. London Heathrow 1972 pilots, that year at what was then called British European Airways, are in the middle of a bitter and divisive pay. Dispute junior pilots are planning a strike, but many of the airline's older pilots are vehemently opposed to the idea. One of them is Captain Stanley, key for years off retirement and anxious not to rock the music. Boat that afternoon, Key is a furious row with a younger militant. Pilot Stanley Key's attitude was that strikes were a dereliction of duty. You had a duty to do, and one thing you did not do is fail in your duty, and your duty was to turn up to work, come what may. Several hours after the Key is rostered on a routine flight to Brussels, left with him on B Flight 548A. Co-pilot Jeremy Keeley and second officer Simon Music Tyhist as the aircraft climbs out of Heathrow. Key at the controls is said to be still fuming from the real. Suddenly things go wrong 2 minutes into the flight. The aircraft goes into a store. It passes low over the densely populated town of Staines on the outskirts of London. Seconds later, it smashes into the ground. Fight almost immediately. Sightseers clog the area. Press personnel go back to the line of police vehicles. Now, please, back to the line of police vehicles. All 118 people on board are applause. Killed. It's Britain's worst ever air disaster. Within hours, air crash investigators arrive. As they pick through the rubble, they find something very puzzling. The flight recorder we took away last night rather suggests that something went wrong with the leading edge droop. Round about 18,800 feet droops are flaps on the front of A, yet wings that extend to provide vital extra lift at low speeds. A Trident must reach 3,000 feet and be flying at 225 knots before the droops can be safely retracted, but the flight data recorder shows that B Flight 548 was only flying at 1,800 feet at a speed of 162 knots when the droops were withdrawn. It's much too soon. The plane will have gone into an immediate storm. This was a first error, but it should not have been fatal, as the aircraft instrument sensor stall, an automatic emergency procedure kicked in. Chris Woods is a former Trident pilot and trainer. The first thing that happens is a warning. This shakes control column and basically saying, the captain, you are flying too slowly. Push the stick forward, which will lower the nose of the aircraft and gather speed. If the pilot still doesn't respond, a second emergency procedure kicks in. A ram will push the stick all the way forward and hold it there until the speed has been recovered. The plane will dive, the speed will pick up, and the stall should be averted. Yet the flight data recorder shows that somebody has overridden these alarms. Why would it cause Stanley Key, an immensely experienced pilot, to make such a basic error, and why had neither of his crew stopped him? The investigators look at several possibilities. A postmortem shows Key suffer heart problems. He hadn't told anybody about them, but he did because the violent are just before takeoff have triggered a sudden stroke. An even more surprising clue comes from a piece of the aircraft's staby. It's the cockpit table of one of the junior pilots. It's covered in anti-Key graffiti. One reads, Key must go where down the drain. Another suggests, when Stanley Key dies, who will be God's next rep at music. B, is this a clue to the real problem? Could the row over strike action have made Key's relationship with his young crew so bitter they simply weren't talking to each other? Had Key or Tyus express alarm, and Key, the senior officer, simply ignored them? In the hierarchical setup in that cockpit, challenging the captain was much more difficult than it is music. Now we will never know if this is the truth, but the inquiry report is a trigger for important changes designed to reduce future pilot errors. From now on, it's the junior officer who flies the aircraft, particularly if conditions are difficult. This leaves the senior officer, the captain, free to watch for trouble and, if necessary, demand a new course of action. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lee Evans, and I'm the captain. Today with me in the flight deck is First Officer Peter Nellos, who will be flying you with a safety routine that in the following years is as widely adopted by airlines across the world, and it's why nearly 30 years later, when American Airlines Flight 587 takes off from New York, nobody questions the fact that Sten Mullen the junior officer, is at the controls. By the early 2000s, the lessons of accidents like Kegworth and Queens have finally been driven home. Reports into both accidents recommend better training. More pilots now spend more time in ever more sophisticated simulators. But in the airline industry, there's also another even more important development designed to eliminate pilot error: automation. Music. The leader in the field is the European aircraft manufacturer Airbus. In the mid-1990s, Airbus launches the new A330 series. It's one of the first aircraft to make extensive use of the new digital technologies. It's so clever it can almost fly itself. Airbus's philosophy was, we can make an airplane that's pilot-proof, that will protect the airplane from the wrong decisions of pilots. And in effect, they have done that. Martin Older is an Airbus pilot to have a simple input control stick on the control column. Just like your game's computer, the stick is like a mouse on a computer and takes instructions from the pilot, but the aircraft's autopilot also receives data from a mass of other inputs scattered through the plane. Computers take information about the speed, the altitude, and the central gravity of the airplane, and they add or subtract from the pilot's input to make sure the output that goes to the control surface on the wingtip is exactly what's required to do the job. It means the controls are always trimmed to provide maximum efficiency. Flying becomes much less reliant on a pilot's skills now with the digital fly-by-wire. Even P of average ability would have no concerns about it. Even more importantly, the software will override the pilot if he makes a mistake. It limits the bank angles that the pilot can apply. It limits how far nose up the airplane can go, how far nose down, to make sure we don't fly too fast and damage airplane, maneuver too abruptly and damage airplane, or fly too slowly and lose control of the airplane. The airplane won't let them do anything. It might cause the airplane to crash apart from takeoff, which still can't be fully automated. There is almost nothing a pilot need do except gaze at the ultra-modern liquid crystal displays. Pilot error is all but eliminated. Flying becomes much safer. Or does it? One of these super automated aircraft is Qantas Flight 72 from Singapore to Perth. The plane has just made 3 dramatic changes of course without the pilots doing a thing. First it's climb, then it's dive. Many of the 300 passengers are in real trouble. People were thrown around. They were thrown at the ceiling and then thrown at the floor. Computers were thrown around. Baggage that flies around. A lot of people got severely injured. Several have broken bones. Many others have been seriously battered and bruised. The pilots now frantically wrestle to seize back control, but for hours they've been gazing at the screens and nothing's happening. It's lulled them into a false sense of security. It now takes valuable minutes to grasp what's going on when you have a failure. There's obviously a startle factor. We are human. And then we have to start taking into the information we've got and then decide from that what the appropriate response is. If you wind up with an electronic glitch or computer glitch in an automated cockpit, this is what pilots often say: what's the plane doing now? What's the plane doing? What's the plane doing? And that expression to me is so important because it really explains that there's sort of a disconnect between the plane and the person flying the plane. This process can cause a pilot to lose very precious time. Finally, the pilots realize the aircraft's fabled computer control system is malfunctioning and switch it off. 40 minutes later, the plane makes an emergency landing in Western music. Australia, everybody has survived, but it's been a close call. 53 people are hospitalized with injuries ranging from fractures to spinal damage. So what happened on this nightmare flight? A later investigation reaches an unexpected and ironic conclusion. It's the very system designed to reduce pilot error that's caused the problem. The plane is equipped with sensors that automatically monitor the angle of flight. These appear to have sent corrupt data to computers controlling the autopilot. First, they tell the autopilot the plane is descending steeply. In fact, it's flying normally. You've heard it about computers. If you tell them the wrong thing, they'll assume it's correct, and they'll start acting accordingly. The autopilot, thinking the aircraft is descending too rapidly, orders an ascent. The computers were told that the aircraft's attitude was varying, and it wasn't, but they were trying to correct This seconds later, the sensors change their mind and tell the autopilot to descend, so the computers themselves weren't actually wrong. The sensors, where the pilots have been left with no option but to turn off the music autopilot. But how can a system designed to eliminate pilot error go so badly wrong? It's a question that will become increasingly pressing in the wake of a terrible accident in another part of the music world. Music Rio. Gennaro Air France Flight 447 takes off on a scheduled flight to Music, Paris on board the Airbus A330-200. Series of 216 passengers and 12 crew. The plane is carrying the latest automated technology designed to reduce pilot music error, but then 3.5 hours later over the Atlantic, it vanishes off the radar. Waiting families in Paris are destroyed. Music goes several days later. Some of the wreckage is found floating in the sea. The airplane hits the surface of the sea. Everybody dies. So once we were up, they're 30,000 foot plus, and then we're in the drink. So what happened? Despite a huge search of the crash area, the flight data recorders are not found. It means investigators can only guess at what may have happened, but once again, suspicion falls on the aircraft's automated flying system. Just before the crash, onboard computers automatically relayed data to an Air France ground station. This shows speed sensors on the front of the plane were giving conflicting readings about the speed of the music aircraft. Would have immediately puzzled the pilots. It's now experts believe they committed a cardinal error. They became so concerned about the problem they lost sight of what the aircraft was really doing. I think this has got a lot to do with the fact that this was at 2 o'clock in the morning. The pilots were fixated on solving the problem. What's going on here? What's making these two indicators tell me lies? And in the meanwhile, the airplane starts descending. The pilots simply had lost their appreciation of what the airplane was doing. They must have music done while the search for the remains of the aircraft continues. We'll never be sure if this is what happened, but once again, vital components in the automated flying system seem to have failed. This distracted the pilots, who forgot to fly the plane. The Qantas and Air France incidents have opened a new controversy. Could it be that the new and clever system designed to reduce pilot error are in fact causing errors themselves? Whenever you introduce clever machinery to get over a known problem, you are introducing a new problem. All you really can do is to make absolutely certain that you are making things better than they used to be. Today, modern cockpits are better equipped and designed, trying to assist the pilot than ever before. Training is more regular, and rigorous pilot error should be on the wane. Flying has never been safer, but the irony is that in trying to eliminate pilot error, we've introduced a whole new series of unexpected